One of the biggest political stories of 2013 will be how the Republican Party reinvents itself and where the Tea Party fits in. Some veteran Republicans believe that Tea Party conservatives cost the party as many as 5 Senate seats over the last 2 cycles by getting into general election races they couldn't win. Now a new group led by Karl Rove is vowing to take on Tea Party candidates to either defeat them or bring them into the mainstream. With me now, Stephen Law, president of American Crossroads, who's leading what's being dubbed as the Conservative Victory Project, and Chris Chocola, former Indiana congressman and president of the Club for Growth, which you won't be surprised opposes Mr. Rove's new effort. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You guys have promised to not physically engage, right? Just verbally, just verbal strike. Why do you believe this is necessary, and what makes your track record at American Crossroads, which wasn't great in 2012,
sure,
one that's worthy of following to bring the Republican Party back into the majority in the U.S. Senate?
Sure. Well, Chuck, we invested over $30 million between 2010 and 2012 in very conservative Tea Party-backed candidates. Some of them were great, Rubio, Rand Paul, Pat Toomey, but some of them were disasters, Todd Akin, David Murdoch, and Sharon Angle. And we think, looking back at 2012, we need to evaluate everything we did. That includes what my group did, but it also includes, I think, focusing a lot more on quality candidate selection to make sure that we've got really, really good candidates who can win in elections and that we can effectively back when we get into general elections.
Chris, one of the chief complaints I hear from people like Steve having to do with Club for Growth is that you guys get involved in a primary and then you don't get involved and you walk away. When you win, you don't do as much that can be done in a general election.
Well, facts matter, and the facts are that in 7 election cycles, 14 years, the Club for Growth has backed 2 candidates in contested primaries that became the nominees, so they won the primary, that didn't become members of Congress. 2 in 14 years.
And who are those 2?
Richard Murdoch and Sharon Angle. Everybody else we've endorsed in a primary, in a contested primary that they won, they became members of Congress. So we think that that's a record that's you know, not too troubling. And the question really isn't why did Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin lose? We know why they lost. The question is, why did Heather Wilson, George Allen, Linda Lingle, Tommy Thompson, Rick Berg, Denny Reberg, why did they lose? They were establishment-backed, kind of clear-the-field type of candidates, so they can just win these races. It's not the obvious loss. It's nobody asked the question, why did all these establishment candidates lose?
All right, respond.
Sure. Actually, I think Chris raises a good point. I mean, the issue of candidate quality is not an ideological one. It's not because we're necessarily nominating candidates who are too conservative. We're just nominating candidates who don't have the discipline or the fundraising drive or a lot of other things that they need to be able to effectively compete against very good Democrat candidates.
What's going to be your criteria to decide to get into a primary?
I think our first goal is going to be to focus a lot on candidate vetting, to take a good, deep look at how they performed as candidates in the past, the things they've said, the things they've accomplished, and their ability to build a broad-based network of support inside the state. Our hope is that we could build a consensus among groups like ours that there's a particular candidate who is the best conservative who can win that race, whom we ought to support. If there's a difference of opinion, at some point we'll have to weigh in and decide whether we weigh in. That'll be a complex question.
The big disagreement I get, though, from the different groups is you're in a process, you're thinking who can win, and you're looking at candidates that align with you on specific issues.
We think principles matter, we think core beliefs matter, and we think that the voters know it.
So how do you square this? How do you square this? Because you can, did you ever not back a candidate? Have you ever made the decision not to back a candidate, even if they were with you on all the issues, but you saw, boy, they could really blow it in general?
Well, I think our record proves that that is the case. We think
you walked away from candidates who were with you on everything against a flaw of somebody you didn't really thought was going to be a too centrist or somebody that wasn't going to be with you, but you walked away from that race.
We pick underdogs a lot. When we endorsed Marco Rubio, he's 30 points down. We endorsed Ted Cruz in the Republican primary, and he was 3% in the polls, but we think that the core principles matter. When you have a candidate that can deliver a clear, articulate, convincing economic conservative message, they can win anywhere. Pat Toomey can win in Pennsylvania. Marco Rubio can win in a purple state like Florida. We think principle matters. We don't think that the Buckley rule that people want to kind of hide behind by saying the most conservative person that wins. Well, who decides that? You can't pick candidates. You can support candidates. The voters pick the candidates that are...
Well, can you figure?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a distinction here, and that is that obviously principles are the most important thing, but there are also other ingredients that go into making an effective candidate. Richard Murdoch had impeccable conservative credentials, but he had
won statewide.
Right, he had, but he had also.
So what made him a flop?
He had a record of lack of discipline in the things that he said. When coming out of the gate saying I like politics because it allows me to inflict my opinion on other people was something that a lot of people found offensive. We went and we tested that with focus groups. We found that people didn't like it. Republicans didn't like it, and it suggested a verbal style and a way of communicating that wasn't.
But you didn't get involved in that race.
We didn't get involved in we didn't get involved in the primary.
Why?
Because it was our policy not to get involved in primaries at all. We ended up investing $6 million to try to get him over the finish line. And I think one thing that Indiana shows us actually is that it is possible to lose even in a very, very comfortably red state when you've got a candidate on our side who's flawed and they can put someone who's very skilled.
First place you guys could clash may be the state of Iowa. Are there candidates there that you could not support in the Republican primary? You have Tom Latham, you have Steve King, but you use Steve King as an example in the New York Times story. Is this a place where you guys expect to be clashing?
Well, I don't know. There are no candidates yet. Nobody's decided they're going to run. Tom Latham has a less than stellar score with us on economic issues, and Steve King ran a very disciplined race in a very competitive race in 2012 against Christy Vilsack, who had 100% name ID and well-funded. So, I think we have to look at what the candidate field is, and we have to look at the relative difference between the candidates.
And should that matter to you as you're vetting in this race? You look at Steve King, you think maybe he's not electable statewide, and yet he did beat a Christy Vilsack, and he ran and Democrats were following him around with video cameras, hoping to catch him in a Todd Aiken moment, and they never did.
Sure, and we put $400,000 into that race, actually, in support of him this last go-around. But I think the question that I was raising in the New York Times piece was simply that candidate vetting, what people say, what they have done, what they might do in the future, has got to be an ingredient in deciding who you're going to support down the road.
Well, we vet candidates all day, every day. That's what we do. And we try to find people that have core beliefs that will take those beliefs to Washington and can articulate to them to the voters. Campaigns are about the battle of ideas. And when you have a candidate with good ideas, they can articulate them, they can win anywhere.
Chocola, Steve Law, we'll leave it there. Thank you both for doing this, for a very civil discussion.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Up next, Senator Bob Menendez tries again.